Thank you all for coming. First, I want to begin by commending the task force for its incredible work. And I want to thank Chairman Michael McCaul on his leadership, one of the most pressing issues that America has for the next century. Back in May, every member on this task force set out to draft a comprehensive blueprint that would serve as a guide to address the China threat. Today, they have delivered. Americans increasingly recognize the danger posed by our dependence on the communist China and a significant threat. One of the effects of all of us that transcends partisan politics. The way the process worked through, the more than 100 individuals to come to brief, from President Obama's DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, to former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. It truly achieved something no Congress in history has done before. It is not only the most thorough report on China in the history of the House, it's bold, achievable, and bipartisan. It doesn't just lay out the challenges, it lays out the solutions in legislative form. 1/3 of these solutions have already either passed the House or the Senate. We need to make them become law. When you think of the future of this nation, you want to make sure that the next century is the American century. This will be the blueprint people look back on a decade from now as the path to make that happen. 3 major items, I would say, in this report, if you want to take a short drift through. One would be COVID has woken up America to our supply chain problem, not just in medical, but from critical minerals and on. Secondly, we need to innovate the DoD. You think of hypersonics, AI, and others. We cannot sit back and just think the rise of China will not affect us. And thirdly, we need to modernize our government. When you look at the Department of Treasury, they have a team that can focus for sanctions when it comes to North Korea or Iran, but they do not have a team that focuses on China. I think these recommendations are one that not only in the House but in the Senate, all of America can get behind, because it focuses on making sure that America continues to stay ahead of the rest of the world. With that, I want to yield to our whip, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Kevin. And I really want to thank the China Task Force for the incredible work that they did to get the facts out. Chairman McCaul and all these members you see here that worked incredibly hard to go find the facts about what China did, the role that they played in this pandemic, the cover-ups, lying to the world. When you look at the damage that was done, I remember being in meetings in the White House back in January where Dr. Fauci and other members of President Trump's team wanted to go in. Our top scientists wanted to go to Wuhan to find out what was really going on. Their scientists wanted us to go to China. They wanted us to come in to help them figure out what was going on with this virus. And it was the Chinese Communist Party who stepped in and said, no, we're not going to let anybody in. They corrupted the World Health Organization to the point where WHO was saying it wasn't spread from human to human. We could have had invaluable knowledge about what was going on to save American lives. Lives all around the world would have been saved if China was just honest with everybody else, but they weren't. And so it's critical that we hold China accountable. It's critical that we get the facts, and that's what the China Task Force did. Went and got the facts so that the rest of the world could see what really happened. As we're working to combat this, fortunately, President Trump moved forward with things like Operation Warp Speed, where he's getting red tape out of the way so the scientists could go find a vaccine. Just last week, it was announced now the 4th American company, Johnson & Johnson, is on the list to actually get a vaccine in the final stage of the FDA approval process. And hopefully, in the weeks ahead, we get one or more vaccines that actually will help people to prevent them from getting COVID-19, but we still need to hold China accountable, and that's what was done here.
And I want to join in thanking our leader, Kevin McCarthy, in putting this task force together, and the leader of the task force, Chairman McCall, in leading us, the staff who helped us make sure that in such a timely fashion we were able to put together a report that touches on every aspect of the threat this nation faces with respect to China. At a moment where we are facing, I think, what is a generational threat, it is too bad that the Democrats refused to join us on this report. As the leader said, 2/3 of the recommendations in here are bipartisan. And in order for us to defeat the threat from China, we've got to work in a bipartisan fashion. So we call on Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats once again to stop putting their personal political interest ahead of the interest of the security of this country and join us in helping to put in place some of these recommendations. I want to say just a few words specifically about the defense portion of this report. China is rapidly developing a military force that is capable of winning regional conflicts, and they are expanding their military footprint globally. China, the government of China and the Chinese Communist Party have gone to school on the United States. They've looked at our capabilities. They've looked at the particular assets that we have that enable us to project our power, that enable us to make sure that we maintain our military supremacy, and they have developed capabilities to counter those. In particular, this report points out the importance of sufficient continued funding for our Defense Department. We have heard repeatedly from the military leadership and the civilian leadership of the department over the course of many years that we must have 3 to 5% annual real growth increases in the defense budget in order to maintain our supremacy. And that was pre-COVID. It's crucially important that we continue that resource funding. We must modernize our nuclear triad. It's crucial to deterring the Chinese Communist Party. And we must also develop and field conventional capabilities that are critical to countering the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific in particular. This includes ground-launched cruise and ballistic missiles. The People's Republic of China is now the leading theater-range missile power with both dual and conventional nuclear delivery capabilities. We must counter that. We must modernize our sea and air power. We must procure long-range precision fires and strategic fires. We have to build contested logistics capabilities, and we've got to develop new operational concepts, joint operational concepts that allow us to counter the threat, that allow us to truly do what's necessary to defend this country. Congress must fund military construction, pre-positioning, strategic airlift, tanker support, and surge capacity. And we must counter the Chinese Communist Party globally as it seeks to establish more robust logistics and basing infrastructure around the world as it seeks to project its own military power. In conclusion, it is very important for everyone to note that we are in the midst of a battle between freedom and totalitarianism. The question we all face is whether the United States and our allies will set the rules of the road into the future, or whether the Chinese Communist Party and that authoritarian, totalitarian regime will set the rules of the road. The proposals that we have offered in this report recognize the gravity and the significance of this moment that we face. And if followed, these proposals will help ensure that freedom and the U.S.-led global order prevail.
It's truly been an honor. As the leader said, this was supposed to be bipartisan. This was a policy exercise, not a political one. And this report will shape our foreign policy towards China for years to come. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue first and foremost. And I want to thank all the China Task Force members standing up here today from 11 committees of jurisdiction, working together cross-jurisdictionally. It's never an easy thing to do in Congress, but we brought it together and we came up with 400 recommendations, nearly 200 legislative recommendations, and 2/3 of those bipartisan, all in this final report that I have here today. This isn't the first time in my career that I've experienced espionage from the Chinese Communist Party. In 1996, when I was a young federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice Public Integrity Section, There were reports coming in that China was trying to influence our elections. Sound familiar? And I was assigned to the campaign task force and prosecuted the Johnny Chung case. He pled guilty, and then he started to cooperate in what was probably the most fascinating prosecution that a young guy at that time could have had. And that's because the investigation revealed the fact that China Aerospace and the director of Chinese intelligence conspired to obtain military, technology, and satellites from the United States. Long story short, the PRC deposited money in Chung's Hong Kong bank account that he used to then influence a 1996 election. This is not time a foreign power has attempted to influence a presidential election, and it certainly will not be the last. But it gave me great insight into the way the Chinese Communist Party operates so many years ago. It's been 20 years since then. But that story could easily be a headline today because the threat from Chairman Xi's Chinese Communist Party largely remains the same. However, today it's more aggressive, it's more expansive, it's more sophisticated, and it's better resourced. For decades, they have stolen our intellectual property. In what NSA Director Admiral Keith Alexander said, one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history. For years and years, we tried to bring the People's Republic of China into the family of nations as a friend, as an ally. But as Secretary Baker recently told me, it just did not work. And recently, the Houston consulate of China was shut down after they got caught stealing biomedical research from MD Anderson in my home state, while at the same time attempting to steal the COVID vaccine, using it as a hub for espionage, stealing our vaccine so they could save the world from the very virus that they brought to the world. That is why this China Task Force report is so important, and it focuses on our foreign policy with the Chinese Communist Party. Whether it's our military posture with China, to countering their Belt and Road Initiative, to condemning their human rights violations every day, to supporting the protesters in Hong Kong and the threatened countries like Taiwan and Tibet in the Himalayas, to countering the CCP's 100-year marathon for global and military dominance. And for decades, the United States and its allies have been asleep at the wheel until COVID-19. COVID created an awakening experience for the American people, and the sleeping giant has finally awoken. And they took what could have been a local outbreak, as Whip Scalise said, and covered it up and hid the evidence, and it turned into a global pandemic. One of the biggest takeaways from this report has been the vulnerability of our supply chain with China. When the United States and our allies called for an independent investigation into the origins of the pandemic, the CCP weaponized their control of the supply chain, threatening to withhold vital supplies from the United States. We must protect our critical supply, including medical supply chains and important technologies like advanced semiconductor chips. And that's why we focused a big part of this report on how we can protect our critical supply chains, including medical supplies and important future technologies. We must take steps to protect these critical supply chains. We simply cannot afford to wait any longer. Our national security depends on it. The Chinese Communist Party is the greatest long-term threat to the interests of the United States of America. You know, my father's generation fought in World War II. I grew up in the Cold War. My children, they experienced 9/11, and most of us in this room did. But now the greatest challenge for this generation is the Chinese Communist Party. It is a generational struggle. And this is a generational document that will guide the Congress for many years to come. So again, I want to thank Leader McCarthy, who worked so hard on this. I really want to thank the ranking members of all the committees of jurisdiction, and I want to thank the members of the task force for their very hard work over the last several months to put this together on time. And I want to thank the staff that worked tirelessly over the weekends and late at night, even as late as last night. Caroline Campbell was working till probably 3 o'clock in the morning to get this thing done. Thanks to all the staff. This is a true appeal to the patriotism of American businesses and Americans across this country to wake up to the Chinese Communist Party. And with that, I yield back.